Is Washington, D.C. an expensive place to live? Well, that really depends on where you're comparing it to or where you might be coming from. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the cost of housing, transportation, utilities, food, and childcare. And if you stick around to the end, I might share some of my personal bills so you can see what the cost of living is actually like and get that perspective from a DC resident. And we're going to get after it right now. If this is your first time to the channel and you want to learn every single thing there is about living in the Washington, D.C. metro area and surrounding suburbs, you've come to the right place. So feel free to subscribe below. My name is Bashir and our team gets calls and emails every single day from people just like you looking to make a move to the D.C. area. So whether you're moving in 10 or 100 days, doesn't matter. Feel free to reach out through call, text, or email, or you could also schedule a Zoom call. We'd love to meet you in person and make that move to our city as smooth as possible. So we're talking about the cost of living in Washington, D.C. Is it cheap? Is it expensive? Is it average? What does that look like? And like I mentioned earlier, it really depends on where you're coming from. I did some high-level research, right? And I found out that a lot of people who come to D.C., who move here, are coming from these four areas: Boston, New York, California, and Delaware. Now, of course, DC is an international city, so we have people from many different countries and also many other states within the US. But it seems like those four areas, we tend to see an influx of people from those four areas. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if you were coming from California or New York, the cost of living in DC you might not look at that as being expensive because you're already used to a higher cost of living in places like California or New York. But if you were moving from a Midwestern state or a Southern state where the cost of living is a lot cheaper, like maybe Texas or Ohio or Indiana, you might look at the cost of living in DC as expensive. So just to give some perspective there, it really depends on where you're coming from. So if you had any plans on moving to DC and you wanted to see how it stacks up as far as cost of living compared to your city, you can use this awesome website called payscale.com, where you can actually input your city or your state and compare that to DC and see what the cost of living is going to look like. So the first thing we're going to be focusing on is housing, because hey, I think this is the most important because we all need a roof over our heads, or I know we all need a roof over our heads. So the cost of housing in DC is 70% over the national average. So the average house in DC is right around $650,000. And in DC, $650,000 is going to get you your standard row house or maybe even a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo. It really depends on the neighborhood because DC, everything is all about the neighborhood, right? We don't really have standard neighborhoods where everything in the neighborhood sells for a certain price, like other suburban communities in different states, right? Everything in DC is really about the neighborhood, the property type. You might have a street filled with $1 million houses, and you might have $200 or even $300, $400, $500 condos located on the same street, right? Or on the street over. DC is very unique in that sense. The average rent in DC for a 1-bedroom apartment is right around $2,200, and the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment falls around $2,700. And again, for both housing and rent, you can find things on the lower spectrum of things. So you can get a house for under $650,000. We help people with those all the time. It just really depends on the neighborhood, but that just seems to be the average sweet spot. Same thing for rent. You can find apartments for under the average of $2,200. But again, it depends on the neighborhood and how new the buildings are. Why is the cost of housing in DC so expensive? Well, let me not say so expensive, but why is it 70% over the national average? Well, that's because DC has very high demand and also at the same time, very limited space. So there are a lot of rules and restrictions on building height regulations and historical preservation efforts. DC is not that big. Even though we have a population of 700,000 people, DC is very dense. So there's not a lot of room to build. What does that do? High demand, it drives the prices up. And we also have a very strong job market. A lot of these jobs attract a lot of highly educated people who are going to be highly paid. And what happens with high paying jobs? It leads to high demand for housing. Now, even though the cost of housing is high in DC, there are different ways to tackle this issue to make housing more affordable for you. For example, DC has a plethora of down payment assistance options to especially first-time homebuyers. So if you're a DC resident, you can take advantage of programs like HPAP, which gives you $70,000 to all the way up to $202,000 for a down payment, 0% interest free as a down payment loan. And this is based off your income and your household size. You have other programs like DC Open Doors. They give you around 3% of the purchase price of your home. So if you were buying a $400,000 home or condo, you would get $12,000 in assistance to purchase that property. There's also assistance available to government workers and first responders. I think that program is called EHAP, EAHP, where you can receive around $40,000 to $45,000 in assistance to purchase a home in the district. Even though the cost of living is high, DC is ensuring that they're putting things in place to help people who need the assistance. Now, on the rent side of things, what you see a lot of people do, especially young professionals who might just have moved into the area and they want to plant their roots here, but they can't really afford to pay $2,200 or $2,700 a month. A lot of people actually get roommates. Now, I know this is not for everybody. It definitely wasn't for me when I was in my early 20s because I'm really particular about my space. I tried it, but it didn't work for me. If you don't mind doing that, it's definitely a viable strategy to make living in the city more affordable. Another initiative that the district has put in place to reduce your housing costs if you were to buy a home was the reduced recordation tax rate for first-time home buyers. All this is they reduce the recordation taxes you pay at the purchase of your home by as much as 50%. However, they do have a maximum income cap, $189,900, and the home purchase cannot be over $730,000. Let's move on to the next cost of living item. The next thing we're going to be talking about is utilities. Now, surprisingly enough, the cost of utilities in DC is 3% lower than the national average. And this is according to payscale.com. And to be specific, the utility we're talking about here is electricity. The average energy bill in DC is around $100 to $150, depending on if you're living in a house or an apartment, depending on if it's a single person household or a 2 or more person household. But the sweet spot, the average tends to fall around that $100 to $150 on a monthly basis. Now, you might be wondering, why is the nation's capital that's supposed to be this expensive place, why is the cost of electricity 3% below the national average? Well, that's because DC is a national leader in sustainability and environmental preservation. DC has the most aggressive renewable energy standards of any city in the US, and the city's leadership has demonstrated its dedication to just making a clean energy future. DC actually has plans to be 100% renewable energy by 2032. And they also have plans to receive 10% of its total electricity from solar by the year 2041. And they also give out different types of incentives to builders who build new construction to build energy efficient buildings and structures. That probably answers why DC is 3% below the national average. They are not playing around when it comes to energy sustainability. Average water bill in DC is $50 to $60 for a one-person household and $70 to $80 roughly for a two-person household. Now, the good thing about DC is a lot of condominium buildings in DC, they usually cover the water bill. It's usually included in the HOA fees. If you were to purchase a condo, for the most part, you probably wouldn't be paying a water bill in that case. So let's move on to the next item, which is food, everyone's favorite. According to numbeo.com, they have a stat here that's a little bit shocking. And it says that on average, DC residents spend $471 per month on groceries. And I'm assuming that this has to be for a one-person household because there's no way this is going to be for a two-person household. In my household, which is just me and my spouse, we spend around roughly, give or take, $800 to $850 per month on groceries. The national average is around $321 a month. I'm going to assume that the $471 per month they were talking about was for a one-person household. So for a one-person household, it seems like the average grocery bill for a one-person household in the US seems to be around $321. So that grocery bill, it might fluctuate depending on the household. I know for us, my wife, she cooks a lot. So a lot of the food we eat tends to be things that we buy at the grocery store and prepare at home. Now, if you were someone who ate out often because maybe you had a job or a career where you're always on the go and you don't have time to cook, I'm assuming that bill might be on the higher side of things just because it's more expensive to eat out depending on where you're eating out. You might want to take that into consideration. Next item on the list is transportation. Now, like many other densely populated cities, Metro Transit is going to be very popular, just like in DC. So it's quite affordable. You can spend anywhere on average from $2 to $6, depending on how far you're going by train. And DC has a very efficient Metro Transit system. You can get off at many different neighborhoods. It even goes as far into Virginia and Maryland. If your mode of transportation was mostly by car, which is mine, I spend roughly on average $33 twice a week on gas. And this is 87 regular gas to be specific. And this is because, you know, I'm a realtor, so I'm always driving around showing clients houses. So I live in 3 places: my car, my house, and the office. So I'm always driving around. So that's why I fill up my tank twice a week. Average, I spend right around $264 per month on gas. And gas around here tends to be, it falls around that $3.30 to, I've seen as high as $3.90, depending on the neighborhood you're filling up your gas in and what gas station. Now in DC, you don't need a car just because it's so walkable, bikeable, and we have an efficient train system. But if you're going to be driving and you're going to be driving often, let me warn you before you move here and get surprised, you need to budget or at least expect this one thing, which are tickets. When I first moved to DC over a decade ago, in 1 month, I racked up, I'm almost ashamed to say this, I racked up $800, yes, 800 in tickets in my first month driving in DC. And it was ridiculous. I almost cried. And the reason is because DC has speed cameras everywhere, right? The main ways people get tickets are by parking tickets, speeding tickets, which are of course taken by the cameras, and also stop sign tickets. Yes, we have cameras at stop signs in DC. They're not as popular. It just depends on what neighborhood you're at. I would say around 20 to 25% of the stop signs in DC have tickets. If you don't come to a complete stop, and I'm talking dead stop at the stop sign, you're going to get a $100 ticket. Yes, and that's how much they go for, $100. So even if you came to a stop and you rolled, you're going to get a ticket, right? And also the reason why I racked up such a high ticket bill was because I didn't know how to park, right? I wasn't really inept at reading the street signs. I might do a video on how to read DC street signs because I hardly get tickets anymore, right? Just because I know how to park, I know where to park to avoid getting tickets. And of course, this is legally avoiding them because I'm parked in the right spots. I might do a video going over that in detail just so you can not be like me and rack up $800 in tickets in a month. It was absolutely horrendous. But I hardly get tickets anymore, like I said. This year, as I'm making this video, this is December of 2023. I've racked up less than the entire year, less than maybe $300 in tickets. I've learned my lesson and I learned the hard way. So we definitely don't want to overlook the cost of tickets. Like I said, DC is very walkable, very bikeable, so you actually don't need a car. We have these scooters everywhere on the roadside. I've never used them before. I'm not sure how they work. I think you might have to download an app and you can just use the scooters and drive wherever you're going and just drop it off on the street. They have employees who come in vans and they pick up the scooters and take them back to the stations to have them charged up, and they just put them back on the street. It's also very bikeable. You might see a lot of people who don't want to take the train or drive or walk. They often bike to work. It's quite common in DC. Or people who just want to stay fit. If you missed your morning workout and you wanted some kind of activity before you went in the office, hey, biking is a great option. Now, the last item we're going to be talking about is childcare. And this one shocked me because right up until me doing the research for this video, I didn't know how expensive childcare was in DC. In fact, according to a survey by the Annie Casey Foundation, Washington, D.C. comes in at #1 for the most expensive place for childcare in the entire United States. We are 85% higher than the national average. What does that number come to? That is a whopping $24,000 a year for childcare. And we're talking specifically daycare here. If you had children and you were moving to DC and you wanted childcare services, you can expect to spend on average $2,000 per month. And this doesn't even include diapers, food, clothes, toys, entertainment for the kids. It's expensive. So if you're moving to DC, this is something you really have to keep in mind and also budget for. Now, if you live 20 minutes away in Virginia or Maryland, it's shocking that the average cost of their childcare is less than half the amount for DC. The average cost for childcare in Maryland and Virginia they come in both at around $11,000. So it's significantly less than DC for only going 15 or 20 minutes away, depending on what part of Maryland or Virginia you're looking at. If you plan on moving here with a family or you plan on starting a family here, you definitely want to take the cost of childcare into serious consideration. Whew, kids are not cheap. So I'm curious to hear what you think. Is DC really expensive? Let me know how it compares to your city or your state down below in the comments. And remember, whether you're moving in 10 or 100 days, feel free to reach out through call, text, or email if you wanted some insider tips to figure out which one out of our 131 neighborhoods in DC might be the best fit for you and your lifestyle. I'll see you in the next video.